Hi, my name is from Mirrix Looms, and today I'm going to show you how to warp a Mirrix loom for bead weaving with the shedding device. Now all of our looms except for the 5-inch mini Mirrix are available with a shedding device. This loom right here is the 12-inch little guy loom, and I'm going to use that as an example. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is set your loom up on a table. All the looms 12 inches and larger have fold-out legs so they can be placed steadily on a table. The 8-inch loom has one fold-out leg. And the 5-inch loom does not, but that isn't relevant to this anyway. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to decide how high you want your looms. You can have it lower, you can have it higher, depending on the piece that you're going to make. Once you decide basically on how high you want it, you just want to make sure that your sides are even. You want to measure each side, and then you can twist your wing nuts if you need to make one side a little higher or lower. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put our warp coil in the tray at the top of the loom. The warp coil is chosen based on what size beads you are using, and you can find out more about that on our website. So you're just going to place your coil up there in the tray. If you have a bottom spring kit, which is an optional accessory, it's the exact same thing on the bottom, so you would put a matching spring on the bottom there. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your wooden clips and you're going to make sure that the two indentations are facing the back of the loom. Then we're going to take our warping bar and we're just going to place that in those indentations right here. Now you're going to want to push your clips in a little bit to hold that bar securely. You want that fairly secure right there. So now we're going to decide what the piece is that we're going to make. How wide is it, and where do we want to put it on the loom? I'm going to just do a very thin piece, which is what I recommend if this is your first time warping with the shedding device, because you really want to go through the process once before you make a wide piece. So I'm just going to make a very thin piece over here on one side. The reason I warp on one side is because if I warped in the middle, the warping bar would be not balanced once we swung out these clips on each side. So if I do it on one side, I'm going to either on the other side warp another piece, or just take a ribbon like this one right here and tie it around on the other side to balance out that warping bar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my beading thread. This is Ceylon beading thread, which is what I typically use. I'm actually going to warp with a Ceylon beading cord right now just because it's a little bit easier to see for the purpose of this video. Now the first thing that I do is just tie onto that bar using a typical double knot. So I've tied on securely to the bar, and now I'm going to begin warping. The warping process is very simple. You go underneath the loom, we'll start there, around to the front, and then when we get to the top here, we're going to place our warping thread in one dent in the coil, which is a space in that coil. Then we're going to go back around the loom, and the thing to remember here is that every time you hit the warping bar when you're warping, you're just going to come back in the direction you came. So we hit that warping bar, we loop around it, and we come back into the direction we came. Now we're coming back around the top of the loom. Because we're warping for bead weaving with the shedding device, we're going to have 2 warp threads in every dent. So coming back around the top, I'm going to place my warp thread in the same dent that I placed my last one. This is very important, and it's very important to make sure you do this correctly, because one mistake can mess up your entire warping. So now we're going to continue back down the bottom of the loom, from the front to the back. Now we hit the warping bar, and our rule is every time we hit the warping bar, we go around that warping bar and come back the way we came. So I'm coming back up around the front of the loom. Now because I have 2 warp threads in that dent in the spring. Now I'm going to go to the next dent over. Back around, hit the warping bar, I'm going to come back the way I came, and now I'm going to place my warp thread in that same dent. So we have 2 warp threads in one dent, 2 warp threads in the next dent. I'm going to come around the loom, hit the warping bar, come back in the direction that I came from, and we're just going to continue doing this. So now I'm going to go in the next warp thread over right there, hitting my warping bar, come back around, and on my way, I'm going to go into that same dent that I just put one in. So, I really just continue with this process. Every time I hit the warping bar, I come back the way we came. I want to make sure that I'm never crossing my warp threads in the middle, because really a warping is all around the loom. You never should cross through. It's easy to not pay attention and to cross through. So if you just keep checking, you can make sure you don't make any mistakes there. The thing about warping is that you really don't want to make any mistakes while you're warping, because it's really hard to go back and fix them. So we're coming back up, we're going to go into the next dent over, hit the warping bar, come back up, and really just continue this process right here. Now at the bottom, periodically we're going to want to come and just make sure that these warp threads are in pairs, like they are at the top. I find the bottom spring kit helpful for bead weaving with a shedding device because it helps you keep your pairs organized at the bottom. But we don't have one on this loom. So hit the warping bar, we come back down, we come back to the top, we're going to go into the next dent over. Now how many dents across is based on how many beads you want to cross. So there are still going to be one more pair of warp threads than how many beads you have. So if this is going to be my last row right here, I have 1 pair, 2 pairs, 3 pairs, 4 pairs, 5 pairs. So this would be 4 beads across. So I'm going to say that this is my last one. This is going to be a very thin piece, and I am just going to tie back onto the warping bar, a double knot. So my goal is to keep my tension as even as I can. I want to make sure that this knot is as tight as it is on the other side. Another thing you need to keep in mind when you're warping is just generally don't put your warp down, don't answer the door, don't play with your dog. Keep warping until you're done warping, because you don't want to let go and mess up what your tension is right there. So there I am. The first part of warping is done. So now that we have the actual warp put on the loom, what we're going to do is swing out our wooden clips, and we're going to move our warping bar towards the bottom of the loom. Now, what the warping bar does, besides giving us a place to tie our warp onto, is it allows us to move our warp. And this is important because let's say you've woven up as far as you can weave, and you still have more to weave. What you can do is loosen your tension and then take the warping bar and move it back up the back of the loom towards the top, and this will actually rotate your piece around the loom, giving you more space to weave. So now that we've bring this down, we can keep our warp threads separated into pairs, and you can see here that the warping bar is not balanced. What we're going to do about that, this is what I mentioned in the beginning about balancing the warping bar. I am just going to take a ribbon. You can really take warp thread or anything you have on hand, piece of wool, something like that. And you're just going to tie this to balance the warping bar. You want to make sure that the tension when you do this is similar to what the tension is on the loom. You can make that a lot prettier than I did, but you get the point. So now what we're going to do is we're going to tighten our tension. You want pretty good tension, but not too much right now because we still have to put our heddles on because we're going to put a shedding device on this. So, you know, you'll adjust it according to what feels right to you. You just want to be able to lift these up to put the heddles on them right now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn around our wooden clips. Just like this. Make sure that these brass pieces are pulled back. Now we're going to place our shedding device there. Now there's a little hole here on the shedding device. If you're right-handed, you're going to want that hole on the right side. If you're left-handed, you're going to want it on the left side. So just place that in there. Make sure that these bars are even. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Now what we're going to want to do is turn these little brass pieces around until they're over the shedding device. That will keep it in. Now, you may, depending on how tight these are, you may need a Phillips head screwdriver to tighten or loosen these. But I like to get mine to a point where they're pretty secure, but I can actually move them so I don't need to get a screwdriver every time. So now we are going to take our bar and make sure this is unscrewed and swing that out and begin putting our heddles on. Now this is a heddle. This one is a Teslov heddle that you can buy on our website, but you can also make your own. There are instructions on our site. So what you're going to do is you're going to find your first pair of warp threads, and you're going to take one warp thread, wrap your heddle around it, and place that on the bar just like that. So what you do is, if the round heddle is like this, and this is a warp thread, you actually wrap it around like that. And then you put that on the side. So you have your heddle, you pull it out like that. Now we're going to take our second set of warp threads. We're going to take one warp thread from that set. We are going to put our heddle around it, and then we are going to pull it out just like that. And we continue doing this with one warp thread from each pair. So there's our third one. What's very important here not to make any mistakes. You want to be really careful that you are taking one from each set, and that everything is on securely. You can even test by holding and then pulling this up and see that you are bringing up one from each. So now I am doing my last one. So I've just taken one. Sometimes people like to use crochet hooks or have different color warp threads when they're doing this to make it easier, especially for a wider piece. So make sure that nothing's crossed, that everything's organized, and then we're just going to screw this back on. There's actually an Allen wrench that you can make that a little bit tighter. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn around our shedding device. So the other bar is on top. We can test here. We can see that we're making a hole when you bring that out. So we're separating the pair of warp threads. Now, this part is a little bit trickier because what you need to do is find the warp thread that you already put a heddle on. So in my first pair, it's this one. And then you want to take the second one and you want to bring it to the right of the first one. Now this is important because if you don't do that, you could cross your warp threads. So I brought it to the right of the first one in that pair, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a heddle on it. So now I'm finding my second pair, which is right here. Now I have to figure out, okay, this is the one that has my heddle on it. I'm going to make sure this is brought to the right of that. And I'm going to put that right on there. So I'm going to continue to do this. Now, again, as I said, you don't want to make any mistakes here. So this one has a heddle on it, so I'm going to make sure this is brought to the right of that. There we go. We have just two more. Now at this point I may want to just check, make sure that everything is running smoothly. If I did make a mistake, if I crossed a heddle, if I missed a heddle, you can really see that there's something wrong. So now here is my second to last set. This one has a heddle on it, so I'm going to bring this one to the right of that and put a heddle on it. That is very important. Always bring it to the right of it. So here's my last pair. This one has the heddle on it. So I'm going to bring this one to the right of that. And putting my heddle on. There we go. So I'm going to make sure that's organized. I'm going to do a little test. And you can see when you do that, that here, half of my warp threads are lifted, and here my other half are lifted. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place my handle in. So I just put that through that hole and screw that on here. And this is what I'll use to change my shed. If I had a treadle, I could also use that. So what you do is you move it like this to lift up half, and then like this to lift up the other half. Now at this point I want to tighten my tension a little bit. Make sure again that everything is even, and we are almost ready to get started.